Okay. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. We're really back on the 24th of January. Yes, although it's not the 25th of January. Obviously, we're not being recorded tonight. It's going out tomorrow. Yes. Yep. Please speak up when you do have to speak. And hi, Lou. All right.
Hi, Joy. Hi, members.
Thank you.
Let's carry on.
Okay. Apologies for absence, James.
Thank you, Chair. I've had an apology from Councillor Kerrin and Councillor Watson.
Thank you. Has everybody read the minutes of the last meeting? Happy with it? Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. Okay. A bit long ago now. It's hard to remember, isn't it, if you have to read it again? No items of urgent business that I know of. No. Declarations of interest. Anybody? No. Okay. Climate change presentation from, is that Kirsty?
No, it's from Ben. Ben at Arup. Ben Smith at Arup.
Okay, Ben.
So I wasn't going to present tonight, if that's okay, because I presented to you last time we met. And you were very clear in saying that you've read all the materials and you don't need another presentation. The main reason that I'm here tonight is to seek your support and endorsement for some consultation that we'd like to do to be able to progress the strategy to its final place. Yep. And we've set out a number of different groups that we'd like to consult with further to shortlist from a very long list of climate actions into a list which will be ultimately included in the final plan. And mostly that's internal consultation within Thurrock to different directorates. And it's going to be on topics such as energy, transport, buildings. We would also like to do some external consultation as well. And so Sean and Rob felt it was appropriate that I come along and just seek your views and input, feedback, to make sure that that was acceptable to you all.
Okay. I've got a couple of things on transport, really.
Sure.
You've got on no pages, but it's on your sort of error plan you sent us. So yes. It's on the red bit. I've got two things. Reallocate road space to sustainable modes of transport to encourage modal shift. What do you actually mean by that?
Oh, apologies. Can you still hear me?
Yeah.
Oh, I think I lost connection for a bit there. So modal shift is basically moving people from one mode of transport to another. So in this case, we'll be aiming to move people away from the private car, which is more polluting, into other forms of transport, such as public transport, walking, cycling, and so on.
Okay. We can all live on cloud nine, can't we? I think at the moment, but it's we're not going to get people unless we do anything on the river. Is the only thing we're going to get people out of cars, which is coming. You know, I think that's a good shift.
Well, that would also count as modal shift. Sorry to interrupt you, but that would also be a form of modal shift. Quite right.
Yeah, so that would be a good thing. You know, obviously we're talking about this new whatever it is coming across in Kent. You know, which we're going to work with. So that will be good for people if we can do what we've got to do. But obviously we've got to have all those things in place along the river, haven't we? You know, we're talking about something I read today. They were talking about doing it at Grays, which I think will be hard because you've got the tide that moves so fast down there. So I'm not sure where they'd actually bring that into. It would only be on high tide. You'd be able to travel. I wouldn't think you could do anything down there without going off on high tide and back on high tide. But they're fine around that. The freight model shift. Through partnership, are we talking sort of lorry parks, or are we talking about shifting some sort of logistics?
Yeah, I mean, to be honest, I mean, that's one of the things we want to dive in a little bit deeper with some of your officers to explore a bit more what's possible. So that's really so those types of actions like that, the purpose of these workshops that we're requesting permission to sort of move forward with would go into each one, discuss them, get feedback from officers about what they've heard recently in terms of proposals in the area, and then develop them and tighten them up so that they're more locally specific and you know, in line with what your officers are already thinking about and working on.
I mean, we can all of us can keep moaning about lorries being parked elsewhere, but if we've got nowhere for them to go, then we still need our logistics. You know, we all need food and clothing and everything else with logistics. So we need somewhere for them. I feel like a record actually, because we've been talking about this for the last 10 years, and I sat, as Lee will know, I sat on the last development plan. Electric vehicles. I mean, I don't know how the others feel here, but we've got to do, if we're going to, anybody's going to get electric vehicles, there has to be more plug-in charging elsewhere, and we're not very good at doing that. I know it's being spoke about, but we're not very good at it, you know, and I travel miles on the road, so I don't want to have to find a stop, so I have to stop there where I could be somewhere, you know.
Yeah, I understand.
No, it's true though, but as perhaps a woman, I'm travelling in a car. I don't want to find somewhere to plug in and sit there for half an hour when I can't, you know, I can't get to wherever I want to go. A lot of sorry to go on about this. It's my last one, and I'll come back in later on. But electric bikes and vehicles. We've got these electric scooters on the road. I had a man travelling, or a young boy travelling in the middle of the road the other day on one, and you think somebody's got to do something, or someone's got to get killed before anything happens. We seem to be, developers seem to be telling us that we don't want to park our cars outside our home. You know, there should be places on the roadside, or that's not possible. You know, people aren't going to buy a house without a parking space. You know, I know I certainly wouldn't, but just think, I'm not sure. Have you got any views on that? Or
well, I think
we'll bring in.
No, I think that you've raised a lot of different points there. So I think the electric vehicle charging stations, the need to have them close to where people are, where they can get to them easily, where they don't have to sit and wait, as you've described, I think is really important, not just in Thurrock, everywhere. So again, it would be, you know, some of the stuff we'd want to get out of this consultation is what conversations have officers already been having with UK Power Networks about deployment of charging stations, how many, what sort of charging, are they low, you know, low power ones or high power ones, fast chargers and so on. So a little bit more detail about all of that would be great. Electric bikes, I think, again, as long as they come along with the infrastructure support, like the docking stations and so on, that can be a good thing. And obviously they are, you know, they have to go on the road and abide by the road laws as do the drivers. I think the point you make on e-scooters is a very valid point, and I see, like you, people taking risks which frankly are worrying, and there's no regulation around any of that yet that I can see. So people are riding them on the pavement and on the road, and that I think is problematic. So it might be that you decide that you don't want to promote e-scooters in Thurrock, but maybe you go with e-bikes and try and ramp up e-charging for cars. But again, all of that sort of thing is the sort of thing that we want to discuss and sort of get to consensus about what we want to push in Thurrock.
Yeah, I mean, when you do your consultation, hopefully try and ring fence the 106 money, you know, because that would be a good point, because I don't think we've ever really got our 106 money right. You know, that is something that will come up on the constitution tomorrow, I'm sure. Yeah. Sorry to have taken that up. Questions. Councillor Tandy?
Yeah, just carrying on from charging docks as well. I think the technology is changing all the time. Car industry's improving. So when Councillor Redsaw said about maybe half an hour to charge, I think it's changing the technology 2-3 years. It might be 5 minutes, might be 2 minutes, fully charged cars, so I don't know what it's bringing in the future, but it's still, like I'm saying, it's early doors with electric cars.
Yeah, I completely agree with you. And that's the direction of travel we all see. So I think it's a case of readying ourselves for the fact that the electric vehicles coming, because we're already seeing that, and the charging is getting faster, but then just making it so that it works for your residents and that it's safe and all the rest of it.
I mean, you say you're doing consultation, then does that include residents too? Because I think you have to get out there.
No, it doesn't. So at the moment, we proposed that we do internal conversations with officers across a few different directorates. So focusing, as I said, on buildings, energy, transport primarily, which is where most of the carbon emissions come from. And we've said that we'd like to do some external consultation, which would be into sort of business groups, developers, that type of organisation, not going out to citizens, residents. And we're waiting on officers to come back to finalise a list of those business type consultees that we can go and speak to. But we imagine we'd keep that into sort of 1 or 2 workshops. It might be, let's say, 10 to 20 organisations that we might speak with.
Okay.
Hello, Ben.
Hiya.
I was actually thinking today that Harold Macmillan is Prime Minister of the 1950s. He was once asked, what's the leader's greatest challenge? And he said, events, dear boy, events. And it's nice sitting here talking about what we could have, but we, this country and Europe, have been struck by an event. And it's one of those we cannot ignore, the Russia's invasion of Ukraine. And that's kicked all sorts of things into perspective, because we don't have the green technology, and the green power isn't enough to keep our economies going in the West. So we need oil, we need gas, and we need security of supply. And we don't have that just yet. And it's nice to have all of these things and a target of reaching net zero, etc. But right at the moment, our necessary and most important concern now is to survive. The fact that we're not getting any more oil from Russia or gas. Did hear tonight on the news that gas fields on the continental shelf, just offshore from east of England, have now been pumping gas. These were set up in 2019, and now the gas price has gone up. It makes it now more profitable for these sites to be owned. But that's just one small problem. We are also looking at the fact that Russia and Ukraine produce 40% of the world's grain, which go to feed, are used mainly in cattle feed. So we've got to find that shortfall because of the sanctions we put against Russia and also the conditions in Ukraine. So instead of building in greenfield sites, we've got to make sure, like today, there'll be no more building on arable land, because we're going to need that to grow cereal crops and other crops to make up the shortfall because of this war. And the other buzzword that's going around Parliament at the moment, if you haven't heard it yet, is not just fuel self-sufficiency, but food self-sufficiency. We're not going to get that with this plan. And as I said, quoting Harold Macmillan, things that change plans or events. We had an event, and all of this is now out of the window. In order to deliver, having enough charging points doesn't matter. The point is, we don't have the power stations to deliver the power to those charging points. Green energy does not do it. Even Elon Musk, my hero, has said that, and he said we should drive to oil and gas. And this is my message to you. It's over. We have to go for oil and gas now in order for this country to survive. And can I have some of your comments and thoughts on that?
Yeah, of course. Happy to respond. So I hear you loud and clear. I respect your opinion. I respectfully disagree on both points. I think that the only way we can come off of having that close link to the Russian oil and gas is to increase our resilience, and moving towards renewable and green energy does that, reduces the demand we need for oil and gas, and therefore makes us as a country more resilient. And I think the Prime Minister has said exactly the same thing just a couple of days ago. On the food issue, again, I hear you. The point is well made. I wouldn't necessarily support building on a lot of arable land either, for the same reasons. However, I do think that we've got to make sure we understand the full context. So at the moment in the UK, only 3% or something like that of all of our land is urbanised. If we use at the moment 20% of the country's land to grow crops which we feed to cattle, which we eat. If we changed our diet just a little bit, we could do a lot more to preserve land for food growing than if we stop building new developments. Albeit we have to obviously be careful about the new developments as well, because it all has implications, and it all comes to the same point in the end. But I'm just saying that the context here is, yes, land use changes. We have to be careful about our land use, but I'm not sure that we need to worry too much about the food issue yet. There is loads of land in the UK that we could turn back to arable very quickly and very easily.
Yeah, I think that's true. I mean, it's a good job, really. We only get 5% of our gas from Russia. I mean, Germany get 40%, so they've got more worries than we have. So I think we're probably taking it down that line a bit too far at the moment. But I do understand where councillors coming from. I think we go around quite a few areas where I do looking. We've got a lot of brown belt at the moment we're not using, and we've got a lot of brown belt out there, as Lee will know. Been around a little while, Lee, haven't you? So we know there's land out there that is not visible, but we know it's there because we know the area very well. So I think we've got a lot of brown belt to actually use. I think if we're looking at developers coming in, perhaps we ought to be saying to them that should be part of the house build an electric charger. Because of, I think there's a lot to it. I can't see us all changing over to electric cars in the next couple of 3 years. I really can't see that. And for one thing, they're too expensive for people to buy, and they've got other things to worry about when they worry about a car at the moment. So, and I think that even when you do your consultations, I'm sure the officers you speak to will know that wherever we've put allotments, and I've put 60 in my ward, they go so quick. And that was the housing land that I found and still belonged to housing. I wouldn't have been able to use it, but that was made over to 60, and they're all growing their own vegetables and selling them on. So that, to me, if we can, should have gone up my spine then, but that's something we should be doing more of, is because they do go. So if something like that is very good, we should do more of those, because there's people in the flats who haven't got any arable land, and they probably would love to get out there. And,
yeah, I'm sure they would. Yeah, that's fantastic.
Yeah, for food. So I think if you know that, perhaps that in the context of doing what you're doing, perhaps that's something that could be brought in. That
Yeah, of course, we would certainly talk about that. Yeah, for sure, definitely.
Can I ask a follow-up question, please?
You may.
Did you have it?
Yeah, there's been his hand, isn't it?
Yeah.
Can I get just Lee in a minute? Lee, do you want to come in?
Thanks, Chair. It was really just to come in on some of the comments there, and I think it's just about a balance, really, isn't it? As with most things, the shortlisted actions are to then get into workshops to look at as a package. How can we help to support Thurrock moving to more sustainable modes of transport and more sustainable way of living? It's not going to happen overnight, as you say, and certainly I can see the country been reliant upon oil and gas for some time to come, but it's how do you start to tip the balance from one to the other, so it starts to lead to a more sustainable economy and way of living. So I would take these the pages here and these interventions not as being some holy grail to make it change, but just a package of measures. Some may be more effective than others, some might not work at all, but it's about having that conversation with those stakeholders.
No, brilliant. I mean, I think back and I think perhaps we shouldn't have taken the power station away. You know, that's something that perhaps was going over to natural, you know, the power station.
Yeah, it's probably a little bit late now. Being there, but yeah.
It was a good bit on the river. It was something you could see on the river, an iconic part of the river. So, something that should be there. Okay.
Speaking of power stations, I did write to the generating electricity generating authority and asked if we were going to convert all vehicles in the UK to electric, how many power stations would we need? And I was told it's in the region of 2 Drax B type power stations. So if we continue down this road without building at least 2 Drax B type power stations, we're going to have rolling blackouts, aren't we? And what left of our industry will have problems operating. And it's not be no chance of expanding our industries in order to make us self-sufficient. What would you say to that?
Yeah, well, I mean, I think there's other things happening alongside the rollout of electric vehicles which contribute to the issue you're describing. So the coming on stream of a lot of ground source and air source heat pumps, which also demand a lot of power, is something that's contributing in the direction that you're talking about. It's going to require more demand on the power grid. But then sorry guys, I'm back again. Where did you get to?
You wasn't far into it then. You weren't far in.
Okay. So yeah, things like heat pumps, air source, ground source heat pumps are going to contribute to the more demand as will the electric vehicles. But on the flip side of that, you've got photovoltaic electricity generation, you've got wind generation. Our capacity to install more wind offshore is vast, and it's only, you know, just starting to get going. So you know, and there's other, and as Lee said, it's about balance. I mean, the energy, I'm not a believer that there's ever going to be a single technology running our country's electricity grid. It's always going to be a mix. We've got a base load of nuclear, we're going to have some photovoltaic, some heat pumps, we're going to have wind. It's going to always be a mix, and it delivers generates different amount on different days, because some of these sources are intermittent where some of them run all the time. So you've got to kind of take things in the round, but I do think that we've got a pretty good handle on what the demand, what the increased, well, as is evidenced actually by the fact you calling up and them telling you that only 2 power stations. You know, there are a lot of people modelling how much extra demand these things are going to generate and over what time period, and then making the you know, the counter investment to make sure that that we can support that. And there's all sorts of regulatory levers which the UK power networks and the electricity grids have put on them, that if they do have blackouts, they get big fines for that. So, and you know, the whole regulatory process around that, which makes sure they have to invest at the speed at which we need to use the power, otherwise they come in for big fines. So, and also, you know, Thurrock is a small part of the overall country. A lot of these issues actually play out nationally, not really in the local area.
Does solar power come under this consultation as well? Was that more?
Yeah, so I'm sure there'll be an action. I must admit, I joined the call just a few minutes after getting in from work. I haven't got it in front of me, but I'm pretty sure there'll be an action in there about solar power, and we'll be having some conversations about that too.
I wonder they haven't, we was talking about it to someone the other day, so I wonder they haven't produced a wind power thing for people to have in their gardens if they've got a big garden or whatever, you know. You think there'd be something down the line, someone's thinking of that or being able to. The other thing is all these electric cars, what happens when the batteries run out? Where do all those batteries go?
Yeah, I think that is a issue which I'm hearing some people talk about. I'm not quite sure. We haven't got to the point yet of having a sort of 5-6 year lifespan where the batteries are needing to get either recycled or. So I think that is something that we're going to have to be thinking about. And
Got to be where he is, isn't it, Jenny?
Yeah, it's having
Looking at
this evening.
Oh, we've lost. Oh, you're
You're
back.
back, you're back.
Sorry, guys, it's really annoying.
Right.
The connection seems to be breaking. But yes, I think you make a really good point on the battery replacement, and we'll have to. I mean, I must admit, I'm not up to speed on that, but my colleagues are, and we need to be making sure that comes forward in your work to be sure that we're articulating those risks. Yeah, and on the small wind turbines, I mean, yes, 10, 15, 20 years ago, I was doing a lot of work recommending small micro turbines on buildings and in parks. Actually, what was proven is because of our urban landscapes being all over the place, high buildings, low buildings, trees, the wind was so turbulent that the theoretical power output from these wind turbines was one thing, but what you actually got in practice was completely different. So lots of companies spent thousands of pounds installing these things, put them up, took lots of pictures, and of course they didn't generate any power. So there are places where so
The ones down Tilbury, sort of near Tilbury cruise terminal where the lorries go in and the docks, they do work there. I mean,
bigger ones.
yeah, as Lee knows, we've got a new school coming on Blackshots Field. We've got 56 acres where the wind blows all the time.
Yeah, of course.
Surely it should have come in. That didn't come in on the planning though, did it? And I think that's somewhere where the school could still put that in. You know, that could still come for the school to run some of their electricity, you know, because that's going to be a big school. And I think there's a lot of space there to do something like that. You know, I know people say, oh, they look unsightly, but if you've just got a couple that go around, if they're doing so much good, they're not taking anything out of anywhere. You know, I think that's a good point to carry on with those. We seem to have lost Ben altogether now.
No, I'm here. I switched off my camera because my connection's so dodgy. But I completely agree that scale of wind turbine is a really sensible thing to be pushing forward with, and in schools and places like that or big parks, it makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, lovely. Thanks, Ben. Councillor Tandy.
Ben, obviously you know quite a lot about the energies we have out there, or future energies. Which one excites you the most?
Wind and solar excite me the most because they're completely renewable and we haven't anywhere near exploited what we could. So they're my favourite. But of course, you know, as has been pointed out this evening, when you bring those technologies into a grid, there are considerations that you have to make in terms of upgrading the grid to be able to accept and take those. So you can never just think of one thing in isolation. But I would say wind would be my favourite. Offshore probably, and then but solar has massive potential. Is that all right?
Yeah.
You okay? Thanks, Ben. Sorry.
Sorry, Ben.
Go.
Just going back to the batteries, batteries have lithium in it, which is a major pollutant. And at the moment, most of the batteries, there's very little in the batteries you can actually recycle. So they normally get dumped off in a third world countries with landfill. I don't find that a particularly green solution. And as for solar panels, they're great, but not at night or when the sun doesn't shine. And as for wind turbines, that's great when the wind blows, but they don't always blow. It doesn't always blow. And the shortfall in that power is to be made up by coal-fired power stations. If we're going to have more windmills and more solar panels, it doesn't mean it's going to be any more efficient. As for the heat pumps, I've had one comment from a plumber who told me, he's an engineer, who told me they're going to be at some stage another mis-selling scandal because they don't always produce what it says on the label. And finally, as for the batteries themselves in these cars, they don't maintain the same output for the lifetime of the battery. They start off high and they gradually reduce. So your journey distances reduce more and more each passing year as you use the vehicle. So we still aren't we're still a long, long way away from electric vehicles replacing petrol and diesel. When do you think they will be an equal competitor?
Yeah, well, I mean, I isn't it 2040? We've got a legislative lever to have internal combustion engine ruled out by that point, I believe. So that's only, what is that? Where are we? 18 years away.
Isn't it?
Sorry.
That's a bit frightening, isn't it? Because at the moment, I can't see it being anywhere near as good or as efficient as the internal combustion engine. And more polluting in the long term.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's lots of factors. I mean, first of all, and I know that there was some shakes of the head earlier when I was talking about modal shift, but I think one of the really important principles to always keep in mind whenever we're talking about the car is that from a sustainability point of view, it's not the best thing in the world is not just to switch someone from driving an internal combustion engine to an electric vehicle. The best thing is actually try and get them out of their car, onto public transport, walking, cycling where that's feasible. I mean, obviously it's not feasible everywhere because it depends on where you live and where you need to get to. But over time, and with the ferry that we talked about on the Thames, there are moves in that direction. So the primary goal is to take the overall number of cars off the road, and then the electric vehicle is the switching from internal combustion to electric vehicles, kind of a second choice option on that. So I don't want to necessarily get into a discussion about whether or not we believe that's going to be the solution that comes to pass. I mean, that's certainly the trend that we're seeing at the moment in the UK. It's sort of indisputable, I think, in terms of if you look at the lines of sale of electric vehicles in the UK over the last few years and how fast that's rising, and there's no sign of that slowing down. Every manufacturer in the world is bringing out electric vehicles onto their into their fleet of vehicles and heavily marketing in that. So there's no signs that I'm seeing that trend is going to slow down. The rest of the world, I think, is trying to make sure that they can be integrated properly. So as you said earlier on, with the right amount of charging, but also potentially, again, one other way of taking cars off the road is not, and appreciating your concerns about people being isolated, but the idea of car sharing and car sharing electric vehicles is something that's been really nicely trialed in Madrid and Copenhagen, Berlin. So you have, like, I don't know, if you've got like 50 houses on a street, you might have 15 or 20 cars instead of everybody having one. Now it works better in cities, obviously, where it's more dense and where people can get to public transport. But yeah, I'm sorry, I'm sort of waffling on a bit here. I don't really know where to take this. I think the electric vehicles are, we have to respond to the trends that we see in the market. We see them coming on stream quite quickly. And over the next 15 years, to answer the specific question you asked me, and I think depending on where the electricity is and how the electricity is generated to power those cars, they do have the potential to significantly reduce carbon emissions. They don't completely stop emissions, and they do cause all sorts of some other sort of environmental damage, for example, wear on the tyres and so on. So we have to make sure that we're not blind to those issues as we move forward. But this is the general direction we're going in, I think.
I think, Ben, we, as Thurrock, we're really doing, if we get that river taxis working on the river, I think that is going to be a big part of, I don't know how long I've been pushing for that, but at least we're moving in the right direction for Thurrock. I don't think, as Councillor Collins said, I probably disagree with him on the solar power, because they don't need sunlight, they just need light to work. So, and they do work. I know many people that are in and getting free electricity at certain times of the day, so they're doing their washing on the free bit, and using their tumble dryer on the free bit. So it does work. So I think we've got to work more with the developers, to find out some way of putting something in the houses. I think Councillor Collins was saying, whatever Britain do, we can do our bit But I think there's many countries out there who are worse, you know, China, India, America, you know, we can't make, whatever we do here is going to be, you know, something in a teacup. You know, we can't do everything to make the world right, but we can do something, you know. So I think what we're doing in Thurrock is quite good in most instances. So we'd just like to see your, when your consultation is finished, you'll hopefully bring it back to us, Ben.
Of course. Oh, there's another question from Councillor Collins.
Right, Councillor Collins.
Thank you. Thank you, Chair. On page 27, under energy and industry, second paragraph down, local plans should support renewable energy and low carbon heat. These should include an energy policy that takes a positive and proactive approach to renewable energy generation and storage. Could you expand a little more on the storage bit? Storage of what exactly, please?
Yeah, so storage can be in a lot of different ways. It could be batteries, not in the car, obviously, but larger scale. It could be hot water, which we use in thermal vessels sometimes to supply district heating networks. And I know there are none at the moment, but if there's some coming forward in the future, that could be one. Hydrogen is the other storage mechanism that we have potential to think about as well. And so my colleagues, not as part of this study, but as part of another one commissioned by yourselves, have been doing a future energy strategy for Thurrock. And so we'd be looking to tie up with them, make sure we're clear on the recommendations that they're making, and then consult on those options with officers to bring forward back to you in a couple of months' time. So I think at the moment, I'm afraid I don't have the documents in front of me, but I think at the moment we've got like 100 and something actions as draft. Now, we don't think that it's ever a good idea to have an action plan with 100 and something actions, because it takes away from the need to get on with things and treat it with urgency and priority. So what we want to be doing is coming back with a much shorter list, 30 or 40 actions, which can be the real centre of your climate plan. And I'm sure that there'll be one in there, Councillor Collins, that responds to that point around the energy policy and storage, and it will have a bit more information about what type of storage might be right for Thurrock.
You may, yes, Collins.
I'll go to page 29 now. This is something close to my heart, so but at least we're on agreement on one thing. Reduce the amount of packaging required. Introduce schemes to increase the recycling and reuse of plastic and other packaging. These are required for supermarkets to reduce all forms of packaging, or a new incentive for food industry companies to encourage them in terms of recycling and reuse packaging. They come out their customers. I'm an old git, so I remember the good old days when you just get meat wrapped in kitchen paper straight from the butchers.
Never so old.
Yeah.
Never so old.
Yeah, and then I do remember this newfangled stuff where the meat is already sort of cut up and portions in plastic trays. And I wondered what the point of that was, even when I was a kid. So there's nothing actually wrong with that as well. If you could just get rid of the plastic bit, we just had compressed cardboard or something. Are we looking at that?
Yeah, you'll have to forgive me, Councillor Collins. I don't have the wording of that action in front of me, as I said before, but we'd look at all the different options that might be available for reducing packaging waste. And if cardboard is one, then yeah, we'd certainly be looking at that as well. And do feel free to, if you've got specific ideas like that, to feed that back through the secretary for tonight, because we can take on board your ideas and doing a bit of looking around and seeing if that's appropriate. We can build that into the plan, no problem.
Okay, I mean, it's nice to have something we can agree on. And there's also on the same page to establish and provide a weekly separated food waste collection service from households across Thurrock to promote a reduction in food waste. What actually happens to that food waste when it's collected or after it's collected?
Yeah, sure. So first of all, this is an action which is normally complicated because it normally ties in with 25-year contracts for waste management in a local authority, and we don't always have control over those, and we don't know necessarily when they're coming up for renewal. So we need to treat that one with a bit of care, and that's part of the reason why we want to do the consultation. But to come directly to your question, normally in a place which has a separated food or putrescible waste stream. That then goes for composting through an anaerobic digestion facility. It releases a gas which can be used for heating if that's appropriate, but it also produces compost, which can then be taken, back down to maybe the what do you call it, the municipal waste site, and then dished out to people who want to use it in their gardens in Thurrock, which is what happens where I live in Merton.
Okay, thank you.
I think we have got it coming, Ben. We've got I hope we've not been too negative tonight, but we have got a new little bin coming. I don't think everybody will be entirely happy with it, but there is a little bin coming, and we've already said we can see problems with it, whether it will stay with the big bin it's supposed to be with, whether it'll end up down the street somewhere. So I think that, as you just said, perhaps we shouldn't have, I don't get any waste food, not that much anyway, and I think we should be looking at more like Councillor Collins was saying, because he's old, that people used to, make things with the food they had over, so I think there's a lot to using that food, but I'm not sure. It's going to be trialled anyway in one ward, so it will be something that comes. I hope we haven't been too negative, Ben. Anyway.
No, not at all. Not at all. I've enjoyed the conversation, and I'm sure by the end of it we'll be in agreement on a few more things. And yeah, I'm sorry I wasn't aware of that trial on the food waste, but my colleagues probably are, and we'll pick that up in the consultation as well.
I chair the other committee, so it comes up on that for me. So having my fingers in a lot of pies, it seems, but I think whether it will work or not is another thing, because I can imagine what people are going to say out there. Not another bin,
Yeah, I can remember when they introduced them in my street, it was a bit chaotic for a while.
It's all right in some respects having 5 bins, but we've got a lot of old properties in Thurrock who are just 2 up and 2 down. Where the hell do they put all these bins? They haven't got room for them. It's I don't know how we managed years ago with 1 bin. Really don't. But at least we're doing something with recycling. At least that's gone up.
Yeah.
And we're doing well with recycling. I think so anyway. I know that my blue bin goes out more than the grey or the green, so I think we are getting people to do the right thing. So I can't wait to see your consultation. I know you said it's with officers and with firms and businesses, but I think try and keep the 49 councillors involved in what you do, because I think you may pick up some ideas from them. They may have good ideas, and if there's a portal somewhere where you can put your idea in, it might be good for you.
Yeah, absolutely. No, that's fine, and I'll share that back with Sean and Rob and say that that's been raised tonight, and we can try and find somewhere that we can put the draft for you to comment on before we get finalised. Ultimately, we'd love your support and buy-in, because we know that's helpful for getting the document through, and we don't want it just to be another document that doesn't have any meaning. So great to have your inputs.
I like something with a bit of meat in it. I like it to go somewhere. If it's not going anywhere, then it doesn't do it for me. I want to see something there that actually comes to fruition.
Yeah, exactly. Well, obviously we're all in it for the same reasons, and we want the same. So yeah, thank you very much for your inputs tonight, and I'll find a way of sharing it as we go.
Yeah, okay. Thank you, Ben. Thank you very much.
No, Rob, do you am I free to go now? You
You should have done it. No, you can't. You've got to sit through it all.
You don't need me for anything else, do you? Okay, fantastic. Have a great night. See you later.
Yeah.
Bye.
Too late. I have to work with packaging. It's too late.
That's all right. Go on.
No, they've done. I'd just like to say I'm quite happy to work with you on packaging.
Yeah, no, I think it's good. Yeah, brilliant. I think that's down to all these big firms like Tesco's, isn't it? Sainsbury's and all them, they've got to cut their packaging out somehow. I don't know how.
And Amazon.
Yeah, well, yeah, yes. Right, item 6, South Essex Housing Needs Assessment Presentation 33, page 33. Is it Andrew or Anthony?
Good evening, all. Hi, Anthony.
Thank you.
I'm going to do a quick intro, and I'm going to hand across to Andy to do the presentation.
Okay, thank
Yeah, but I understand clearly you've got the slides in front of you.
Yeah.
So I would suggest Andy will go through fairly swiftly. I'd suggest if you've got any questions as we go through, you try and raise them, because I think it's as easy to address. But yeah, obviously you'll note that the presentation was undertaken, well, published a couple of months ago for the previous meeting. But I will hand across to Andy to walk you through the slides.
Thanks. I'll just share the slides now. Can everybody see that?
Yeah, fine.
Okay, great. Yeah, thanks, Anthony, and yeah, thanks everyone for giving us the opportunity to update this evening. So yeah, as probably most will be aware, we're in the process of producing a new housing needs assessment for Thurrock, as well as Basildon, Brentwood, Castlepoint, Rochford and Southend-on-Sea. We are updating and eventually replacing the existing evidence base that's been commissioned over the last 5 or 6 years or so. And in doing so, we'll be taking account of the latest available evidence and also establishing recent trends in the housing market. We'll also be looking to account for changes in national policy and guidance, again, since that previous evidence has been taken and produced. And by following that guidance, the study should form a robust part of the evidence base for the next generation of local plans, as well as the emerging strategic planning framework for South Essex. So I mentioned that we're updating an evidence base that already exists, so I thought it was helpful to just give a quick overview of what's come before. So some might be aware, but back in May 2016, just coming up to 6 years ago now, Thurrock produced a strategic housing market assessment, as they were called then, for the South Essex authorities. That was just 5 of the 6 that are commissioned now, so that didn't include Brentwood, who I'll touch on separately in a moment. So that study was completed in May 2016, and then a year later we produced an addendum just to take account of some new data that had been published in that subsequent year. In parallel, separate evidence was being produced for Brentwood, so that was that subsequently updated at the second. It's done in 2 parts. Sorry. The first part was updated at a later stage, so that's why the part 1 comes much after part 2. So that was last updated in October 2018. But then within that time frame, just a couple of other useful milestones to be aware of, which sort of hints at why we're updating the study really. The first is that in January 2018, the 6 local authorities that now commissioned this study agreed to work jointly on housing and infrastructure development, and that led to the formation of Association of South Essex Local Authorities, I'm sure you're familiar with. So that basically combined the 5 previous South Essex authorities with Brentwood. And then about 6 months later, in July 2018, we had a revised national planning policy framework, which really changed the context for studies of this nature. So in terms of that change in policy context, as I say, the revised NPPF was published in July 2018. It's been slightly altered twice since, most recently in July of last year, albeit those changes have been quite minor. Each update has retained what for us has been a key change in the NPPF, which is the so-called standard method for determining the minimum number of homes needed. That is something that was anticipated in the addendum to the South Essex Schma. So it was a recommendation of an independent review into local plans, just as a way basically of simplifying and replacing what had become a very complex and fairly unwieldy system of objectively assessed need, or OAN, as it was often known. And that was accompanied by a whole raft of new guidance. And that guidance does acknowledge that this is a standard method for determining the minimum number of homes needed, but there is still acknowledgement there will be circumstances when housing need could be higher, or in very exceptional circumstances where it could be potentially lower than the method indicates. The NPPF continues to require assessment also of the size, type and tenure of housing that's needed by different groups in the community. And it also still requires all policies to be underpinned by relevant up-to-date evidence, which is adequate and proportionate. And that's obviously part of the reason why we've done this update, where the previous evidence is becoming a little bit dated now. So it's within that context that we were commissioned to start work last summer, and there's a sort of a first stage of work, just reviewing data and understanding really the recent trends in the housing market since the last evidence was prepared. So that's just what I was going to very briefly run through. There is a lot more to this. So I'm sure when you eventually see the report, you'll see a lot more detail. So by no means intended to be exhaustive. I hope it just gives a bit of a flavour for what's been going on in South Essex, and I've tried to pull out some of the key things for Thurrock in doing that as well. So one of the key things that became immediately apparent to us is that, as you would expect, new houses continue to be developed in this area, but the rate at which they're being developed has been slowing over the last few years. So if you look back, draw your attention to 2017-18, when about 2,000, just nearly 2,400 homes were completed. That was very nearly surpassing the peak from pre-recession, when 2,417 homes were completed. Should note these are combined figures for all 6 South Essex authorities. So that was a very positive story in the sense that it was approaching what was an historic peak. But then the very next year, delivery fell by about a fifth, fell by another 5% the subsequent year. And then in the last reported year, for which we've got complete data, 2020, 2021, we had 1,675 homes completed, about 10% down the year before. Obviously, 2020 to 2021 was affected majorly by the pandemic. So that 10% fall is pretty much in line with what we're seeing regionally and nationally as well. Apologies for the slightly complicated chart, but this is basically just to show the trend at authority level. So again, I can direct you just to the far right, just to focus on Thurrock. And what's interesting for Thurrock is actually follows a very similar trend to South Essex as a whole, because the number of homes that are delivered in Thurrock, it has a big bearing on how many homes are delivered across South Essex. So we've tracked the trend back to that previous pre-recession peak, so you can see that Thurrock was the major contributor towards that. But then in the subsequent years, delivery fell away quite significantly into the depths of recession, when less than 100 homes were provided. To then build up again to build about 300 homes a year for about 5 years, stepped up again to around 600, and then it delivered 850 in 1 year about 4 years ago. But again, that wasn't sustained, so it did fall off quite significantly, and then it's sort of jumped around a little bit in the last couple of years. Obviously, I'd say that the pandemic has had an effect there as well. So that sort of shows the annual.
Just for a minute.
Sorry. Yeah, of course.
One before.
Say that again, sorry.
Can you just go back to the graph you had before?
Yeah, of course.
So you had the
Yeah, that one.
authority level, yeah. I mean, you've picked 2 places there, Thurrock and Basildon, which has the highest population in the 2. I mean, it's going to be logical, really, isn't it? Castle Point covers Canvey Island. Yeah. And not a great ratio of new houses being built. With this graph, does COVID come into it, where houses weren't being built roughly for the 2 years, or not?
I suppose it covers a little bit of when COVID did disrupt the market, but I think it provides a much longer term view, hopefully, before that. In terms of the population, yeah, totally agree. We do touch, I'll come on to the population a little bit later. But yeah, so it's not surprising, and it's something that we picked up previously in the study, is that Thurrock does have a big bearing on the South Essex trend as a whole, just by virtue of its size and population, really.
Okay, thank you for that.
Okay. So yeah, as I said, that's really the annual trend, but I think when you take a step back and look at another way of looking at it, just proportionate growth in the housing stock over a period of 5 years, and this is the last 5 years we've got data for, back to 2016. And you can see that South Essex as a whole grown its housing stock by about 3%. I'd say Thurrock has done quite well in a South Essex context, growing it by about 4.4%, which is obviously the highest in South Essex. But even that is still short of what we're seeing nationally and at the East of England level, which is close to 5%. So that's just sets a little bit of context, really, as to the scale of growth in the housing stock. And then because the stock has only grown by a relatively small amount, 3 to 4%, that means that the profile of housing is still very much as it was described in the last study back in 2016. So in the case of Thurrock, it sure won't surprise anybody, but it's got a distinctive housing stock in the sense that it has quite a lot of terraced houses, certainly compared to other parts of South Essex, with the exception of Basildon. But then proportionally fewer detached houses and bungalows in particular, both compared to South Essex, but also the regional and national levels. So as I said, that was talking about the housing stock, but then population is obviously another important thing to factor in. And this is just literally the population of South Essex going back to 2001, the combined 6 authorities. So as you'd expect, the population has continued to grow in recent years. and it passed 800,000 over the year to June 2020, which is the last year for which we've got data at this point in time. Thurrock accounts for about 22% of that, so the population stands at about 175,000. But what's interesting about that profile of growth is that actually it has started to slow over the last, well, the last year in particular, really. So these bars show the annual rate of change in the population of South Essex as a whole. And you can see that there for 2019-20 is the last year for which we've got data for 0.2%. So that's the lowest of any year of those shown. And it's actually the lowest annual rate of growth since the mid-1990s. So that's interesting. One thing to note is that this measures the year to June every year. So that means it does capture the first few months of the pandemic. So potentially that is a factor, but then we've overlaid the national and regional lines as well. And that basically just shows that obviously the pandemic affected the country and the region as a whole as well. But they didn't see as sharp a drop off in the population. So it suggests that it's not purely down to, you know, an excess number of deaths in the early months of the pandemic. There was something else going on behind that trend. Hopefully we can sort of drill into it a little bit further to understand some of the causes of population growth and some of the drivers of change. And there's probably just a couple of main takeaways from this chart. So if you look at the orange bars, that's natural change, which is the number of births minus the number of deaths. So that's just a natural change in the population every year. So as you can see in South Essex, which is what this chart is for, births consistently outnumber deaths and have done for at least 20 years. But then the actual balance between births and deaths in 2019-20 was sort of, they were more balanced than at any point back to 2002-03. So again, that's having a negative effect on population growth compared to the years before. And again, that's largely down to an increased number of deaths even in the early months of the pandemic. We've also got international migration, but the sort of the lighter blue bars, that's been fairly stable over the last 10 years or so. So again, that's not really a factor behind that slowing of recent years. But what looks to us to be quite a significant factor is the dark blue bars, which is internal migration, sorry. And that is basically the number of people moving into South Essex offset against the number of people moving in the opposite direction. So it's the net flow into South Essex. And again, before 2019, you can see that has consistently been positive in South Essex. So more people are moving here than are moving elsewhere. But then in 2019-20, for the first time, at least since the turn of the century, there's actually a net outflow of people, albeit a relatively small one. And that's potentially linked to what had been, so the easing of what had been a fairly increasingly large net inflow from London, which again we can drill into. So here we've got the blue bars, which are the flows from London to South Essex. And as you can see, they had increased from 2011 up to 2019, while the orange bars, which are the moves in the opposite direction, had remained fairly stable. And that meant that the net inflow from London was going up to over 10,000 people per year. But then in the last year for which we've got data, both the inflow and the outflow dropped by about a fifth. And that's basically just taken some of that steam out, I guess, of that net inflow. Obviously still to be seen what will happen in 2020, 2021, whether this is just a blip or whether it's the sign of a long-term trend. And that's certainly something to be keeping an eye on as we get new data for that year. And then again, we can drill into it even further and look at the age of people that are moving in and out. So this is just a net flow of people, different ages moving in versus those moving out. And what I again particularly draw your attention to is the net inflow of people aged 30 to 44. So obviously sort of mid working age people, which is the orange bar, that really has increased quite significantly. So sort of over the 10 years to 2016, 2015 and 2016 or so. And then also there's an accompanying rise in the number of children 15 and under, which is the blue bar, the blue line, sorry. So that strongly suggests that there's a net inflow of children and their parents increasingly are moving to South Essex. But then on the flip side, you can actually see there's an increasing net outflow of people that are over 45, who are the yellow bars, and then the yellow lines, and people that are 65 and over, who are the green lines. So it suggests that it's becoming increasingly a family location, and then people are moving out as they get older, increasingly so. And then that in turn flows through into the age profile. So we looked here at how the age profile has changed over the last 5 years at the South Essex level, which are the blue dots. And as, again, that just reinforces that we've got a 7% growth in children, a growth again in those aged 30 to 44, and also some growth in the older age groups, which isn't really being driven by migration. And then for Thurrock, we've just highlighted those bars in green. So again, it's very much seeing the same sort of trend, really, in the sense that it's seeing a growing number of children and adults who are effectively parent age, while the only group to see decline really is the 16 to 29 young person age group. And then just finally, I was going to touch on briefly on house prices, which obviously are a long recognised measure of the balance between supply and demand. In a South Essex context, Brentwood continues to be see the highest house prices, quite considerably so, quite considerably higher than Rochford, and then Thurrock sees the lowest prices. So in 2020, which is the last full year for which we had data when we did this analysis, the average price paid was about just under £308,000. But then it's interesting to note when you look at change over time, Thurrock actually saw the biggest increase. So house prices increased between 2014 and 2020 by just over half the average price paid. So that's a fairly significant increase. So the house prices are fairly low in a South Essex context, but they're rising rapidly. But then interesting to note that the actual rate of change in all 6 authorities really is very within the similar sort of broad range of 40 to 52%. So that's just a fairly widespread demand pressure. And then just another interesting thing to note, when we did this analysis back in the autumn, we didn't have a complete year of data for 2021, but obviously I'm sure many people would be aware the pandemic did have quite a significant impact on the housing market, and it did see increased demand in certain places. So we sort of tried to do what we could do with this, and we looked at it just by month. So then when we did this work, we could have sales data up to June. So we just thought it was useful to compare the number of sales in each month compared to the years before. And what's interesting is if you sort of track the lines down, what that means is that every year for the 4 years before the pandemic, sales have been a falling number of sales in South Essex, year on year decline in the overall number of sales. And obviously the dark line at the bottom is 2020 as the year of the pandemic. So that did take a big hit when the market was shut down in March to May. But then for 2021, over that first 6 months, we did see an elevated level of activity. So there was 17% more sales in the year to June than there were in 2019, as the last year sort of unaffected by the pandemic. And then in the first quarter, there were 30% more sales. So it was very much a lot of activity going on in the market. Some of it, I suppose, pent-up demand, but equally, potentially a reflection of people moving and changing lifestyle, etc. That was in turn feeding through into house prices. So house prices were, over that first 6 months of last year, about 9% higher than they had been on average in 2020. So that's again something that we can now have a complete year's worth of data. So that's certainly something we'll look to incorporate into the report just to see how that's actually played out over the rest of the year. But again, it's just an interesting early sign of how the pandemic affected the housing market, really, where some of the population data and housing stock data is a little bit more of a time lag. So that was a very quick overview of some of our early findings, but just wanted to give a brief update on what we're doing at the moment and what's coming next. So our main task at the moment is establishing the minimum need for housing, and that's using the standard method they introduced before. As of when we ran this analysis at the end of last year, at the turn of the year, it suggested a need for about 4,500 homes per annum in South Essex, obviously quite a bit higher than the recent historic peak in terms of delivery, and obviously even higher than the current delivery as well. So it's a fairly stretching target. Thurrock, the figure for Thurrock is 1,137 dwellings per annum. Again, as we said before, it's very much that South End, Thurrock and Basildon are the main drivers. They received the highest numbers. It's a reflection of their size. But then, as I say, that method is intended to just give us a minimum figure, and planning practice guidance does require us to evaluate the outcome of that figure and really sense check it. So it requires us to look at the outcome in the context of previous assessments of need, obviously the one that was done by ourselves for 5 of the 6 authorities, and also the one that was done for Brentwood itself alone, as well as past delivery, which obviously also already started to do. The guidance also accepts there will be circumstances where it's appropriate to consider whether housing need will actually be higher than suggested by the method. And that could either be because there's an agreement to take on unmet need from elsewhere, or there might be a deliverable growth strategy or plans for strategic infrastructure improvements. And here for Thurrock, we're making a link across to the economic development needs assessment that's been separately commissioned. So we are in dialogue with the author of that study, just to make sure that their conclusions in terms of growth strategies and future job growth and the impact of infrastructure improvement gets factored into our study as far as possible. And then, as I mentioned before, there is PPG does the guidance does leave some scope to justify a lower level of need. But that isn't certainly not something that the government is looking to encourage by any stretch. So it has set the bar for that deliberately high. So it's a very high bar to have to jump if we are to demonstrate there are exceptional circumstances for a lower figure. I mean, as I said before, it's not just about the overall number of houses, it's also about the types of housing that are needed. So we'll be using the demographic modelling that we'll be producing to estimate how the population and household profile could change. And then in turn estimating the types of housing that will be needed, taking account of the different types of houses that are occupied by different types of household currently in this area. We'll also be calculating affordable housing need using what is a fairly long established but separate methodology that takes account of the backlog based on households on the housing register, and also looks to estimate newly arising need from households that form but can't afford to the cost of market housing. All that gets balanced against supply, and we'll also be looking at the role of different products where affordable housing really has diversified quite a great deal since the previous study was done, and obviously it continues to be with the recent introduction of first homes, for example. And then finally, we'll just be drilling into some specific groups that have been identified by the councils and just considering what their particular needs might be, and whether that's older people, people with disabilities, families, privately renting households, self-builders and students. So we'll just be looking at in turn, just drawing together the evidence that we can get to give it a steer as to the future needs of those groups. So that's a very quick run through of where we are, but I don't know if there's any questions, happy to answer them.
Need a drink now. I think a lot of what you said. Yeah, thanks for that.
No problem.
Andrew, could you put yourself on mute, do you think, just while they ask the questions?
Yeah, of course.
Thank you. Yeah, a lot of what you said, I mean, it depends on the developers wanting to build here, depends on what we build. I don't think we've built the right type of housing in most of the new developments we've built. We're not building bungalows for people who want to stay here and free up the 4-bedroom and 3-bedroom that we've got. If they want to stay with family, they can't. Saying about your influx from London, I can see it in my ward where people for years haven't moved at all. And now you've got the influx from London in, ours are moving out and up. So I think that does matter. If we don't build the right sort of housing, we're not going to keep the people here. And as Lee knows, we've been talking about the infrastructure for Thurrock for so long, and we've never done it yet. You know, if we don't make that infrastructure in a proper way, we are never, Thurrock is going to be gridlocked forever. You know, because whatever happens in London Road, on the bridge, it fouls us all up, you know, from way back, you know. So I think we've got to get the roads right to start with. I'm not sure the Lower Thames crossing is the right road. I don't think it is, to be honest. And it looks like that's having some problems. But I think that's not going to help. I don't think with what's going over the bridge at the moment, because it's going to go right back to the M25 anyway. So, you know, we have to get the infrastructure right. London Road is a road that is got tunnels underneath it, you know, and if you keep travelling traffic that it does through the day, all day, every day on that road, something's got to give. You know, we've had a few holes appear in Hog Lane. So I think it's those sort of things, the traffic that goes down London Road most of that new houses that are there will be grey later on because of the amount of traffic that travels down that London Road. I don't know what you do about it, to be honest. We've got the new A13, the old A13 and London Road. So you've got those three roads in parallel with each other. So, but we've never really got the infrastructure right at all. You know, Lakeside was built, I don't think Lakeside was built without any flair. You know, the thought didn't go into it. You know, you're taking people into a tight-knit community in Lakeside, and there's only really a couple of places out to get out. You know, there's nothing in there to take you off to get anywhere else. So I think we're in one. What are we doing about the bungalows we're not building, people? I hope I see you've addressed it in there. So we do need that type of housing. We need also quality housing. You know, not always quantity, we need quality housing. And it's all right us saying houses are affordable, because they're only affordable if you can afford it. You know, so it doesn't actually, it's a word I don't like, because I can't see the point of it, because it is only affordable if you can afford it. So I think with self-build you've mentioned in there, I don't think that's ever been done in Thurrock. I don't know, I think we've got 3 high rises now in Grays coming down, you know, so we have to house those in a better way to give them quality of life, which they've not had where they are. So I think we've done one good build in Chadwell, which is brilliant. I would think those people are happy to be there. But I think we've got to do more like that. And with developers, we've got to start telling them it's not the amount you get on the site, it's the quality you build. You know, so do you want to address any of that, Andrew?
Yeah, I think absolutely. In terms of the sort of the qualitative point is, as I say, it's not just about. I think a lot of discussion on these types of housing needs assessment does boil down to a lot of the attention gets drawn by the overall number, but absolutely, I agree. It comes down to the type of housing that's needed as well, and obviously, it is things like bungalows. You know, there will always be a need for bungalows, but there's difficult decisions to be made about you know, about land. So bungalows are fairly land hungry type of development. So. Yeah, I think a lot of these issues are probably going to be dealt with so as the local plan gets developed. But appreciating we're only part of the evidence base really, and saying this is how many houses we really needed, and this is these sort of gaps in the housing stock profile, etc. And it comes down to then other parts of the evidence base in terms of the transport and infrastructure, etc. And yet it's been able to balance that all together, I think.
Thank you. Councillor Glennon.
Hello, Andy. Can I just ask on page 51? I was looking at the data here. How many? Do you have any data on how many private empty houses housing stock we have in Essex or Thurrock?
Which slide? What's the slide called? Sorry.
I just had to scribble it down on page 51. House prices are still highest in Brentwood, but rising everywhere, and Thurrock was up 52%. Do we keep a log of any empty private houses?
Yeah. So we have looked. That's something that was just omitted from the presentation, just for clarity more than anything. But yeah, there's council tax data. So like vacant houses are recorded as empty as council tax data. So it's fairly up to date in terms of saying which the number of houses that are vacant over time. I think it does feature in our draft report, and that's something we've looked at. We've mapped it in the past as well. Sometimes local authorities have the actual data showing precisely where the properties are. I don't think we've done that in this case, but yeah, we certainly have looked at vacant properties to look at the trend there as well.
Are the numbers significant?
They're not huge. They are certain, and they certainly come down since we did the study, and I think that's a trend that we've seen nationwide, to be honest.
Roughly how much percentage, roughly?
I couldn't give you a percentage off the top of my head. Unfortunately, I don't have that figure to hand. But we can certainly put that in the report to make sure that's clear.
Please, I work around homesteads and Stanford and Thurrock. I do come across you know, empty private houses, and they go to rack and ruin. I wonder who's going to take ownership of those. And these are houses that people could use.
Yeah.
So it would be it'd be interesting to find out. I think how many we've got and where they are.
Yeah,
That's
absolutely.
a question, please.
May?
Next one, this goes on to considering the types of housing needed.
Yeah.
This is on page 26, specifically considering the needs of different groups identified by the councils. I know in Thurrock we're quite proud that we put ex-service personnel on our list of people who need specific needs as priorities. They're not on this one though. They're missed off. Could they be on the next report, please?
Yeah, we can certainly look to incorporate that. Yeah, I think that was taken from our brief, so no other groups are raised, but we can certainly speak to the council and see what we can get to include that.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Chair.
Yeah. Just looking at this picture, I think it's just over the road. Is that Seabrook Pliers on the South Essex housing, the picture? So, yeah, it does look like Seabrook Pliers. So it's okay. We have to build houses. Obviously, the demand's there. It's all about building it neat, nice, looking good as well. Because I don't. Because there's one down the road here. They see the price the corner block. It's really top spot.
I know you are. Yeah.
Beautiful building. The way it looks, I think it's half council. I think people don't mind. But you build houses, make them look nice. You've got houses in Chafford. I think it looks great as well. The worst probably for me is London Road. Mason's Lane, got them as well. So that looks like an eyesore, but again, it's got to be appealing. So there is good designs, and this picture shows that we can build nice houses. And also going to affordable. I mean, Chair says that affordable. I think on the list there's not many 2 bedrooms you're building. The majority is going to be 4 bedrooms. And how does the affordable person, for the first time buy a 4 bedroom?
Yeah. Yeah, I think we are looking at where we can the various costs and the different challenges accessing different sizes of property. So yeah, again, that's something that is quite often seen, and that's the role of the local plan really, is to provide some evidence based to provide some sort of steer as to the size of housing that gets built. And yeah, in terms of good design, again, it's probably strays a little beyond the remit of our study, but that's certainly something that's increasingly been recognised in government guidance. I think that's one of the main reasons why the NPPF was revised last year, was to incorporate some of the references to beauty and things in new housing development, because it's a recognition at the national level that that more beautiful houses are, the more likely they are to be accepted into local communities. So yeah, absolutely agree.
Andrew, probably in some respects, the developers that build houses, they seem, or even us as a council, seem to want to put older people in a separate place, over 55s in a separate place, and youngsters in somewhere else. I think what we've got to start doing, because not every older person wants to live with all older people. And I don't think it does them any good. They're not seeing life. They're not seeing children grow up. So I think sometimes we've got to look at it in another, some developers are good and some are very bad. I've got a development in my ward which is actually atrocious. If that is how they built houses, then it's awful. And most people that have moved there want to get out of there now, because it was built. Obviously, it was when the TDGC was here, so our planning, didn't have anything to do with it. So, but I do think if you're going to build houses like that, which don't even blend in to the rest of the area it was put in, that's what we've got. Developers have got to start coming forward with some good quality community places to get people together, to have that community base. And I don't think at the moment we are actually doing that. So I think we've got a long way to go. I don't know how you feel about that, Andrew.
nothing really to add. No. Yeah, I don't disagree with anything that you've said.
Yeah, I think, and I'll just add in my thought. I mean, again, yeah, the development industry obviously need to respond to the local plan as you develop it. Clearly, our piece of work is about evidencing the types of need and demand for different housing, of which I think, as you've highlighted yourself, there is a need for lots of different types. How they're then integrated into good forms of development, sustainable developments, is a critical application of the local plan, really.
I think if you put all older people together, you haven't got much of a community, have you? Because
No,
they're getting old together and they can't do a lot, and it's sometimes nice to have younger people about who they can, you know, see or see what's going on. And I know you in this, you will feed this back to, my committee if I'm still on this committee in the new year, but the simple year. But I think developers have got to work harder, I think, to be able to come to Thurrock. I think they've got to start building some good quality housing, and get us everybody together. Because you only get a community if you build it up, And we've got lots of them over Thurrock now, which have grown up, and the older people are still there, and the younger people are sort of coming in. So you've got that community base. So, and I think we've got to do that, and more open space for people to walk and sit and enjoy. And I don't think we do a lot of that either. And I know that is coming through on the plan, that we've got to have more open space for people to enjoy. Lee, did you want to come in?
Thank you, Chair. It was really just to pick up on a point that Andrew made about evidence base, and I think that was really important, because so what we've been looking at on the last presentation and this presentation is really about how we start to build up the evidence base. So those studies themselves are obviously interesting as a snapshot and to play the data back to us, but it's then how we use those individual pieces of evidence to then pull together the local plan. So it's building that base. So when we are reaching out to our developers, we will be quite demanding in what we expect as a borough. We do expect high quality places, the things that you just spoke about, and it's about what I'm picking up from you, Chair, is the need for community and place making. This isn't just about numbers. It is about places, multi-generational places where people can live, hopefully work and play in the same towns and villages. And of course, it's around that. It isn't about one size fitting all. Recognizing that all of our towns and villages have slightly different needs, slightly different expectations, aspirations, and how do we play to them strengths. And the next presentation that Kirsty will take you through will pick up on some of that, about how we're pulling all of these different areas together to build the plan.
I think we're on the same song sheet, aren't we? So,
Yeah.
Questions? No? Okay, thank you, Andrew. Thank you,
Thank you.
Anthony.
No problem at all, and thank you for your time this evening.
No problem.
Thank you very much for your input for all this. We expect to see you back soon.
No, look forward to it. All right, thank you very much.
Okay,
Cheers.
thank you.
Bye.
Cheers. Right, item 7, local plan update, page 59. Who's doing that?
Chair, it would be Kirsty that will be presenting in a moment, but I just wanted to give, I guess, a little bit of context first. So this report was on page 59, was obviously put together in January, so it represented a bit of a snapshot as to where we were at that time. The idea of this paper was to really set out for members the structure of the new local plan. Page 61 is probably a good place just to hover on. So that set out the key sort of headings, and as say that sort of structure of the plan. Importantly, setting out the distinction between strategic policies and non-strategic policies. And then there was what we was going to talk to you about in January, was looking at how we were essentially breaking the plan down into components, and we have our spatial planning areas. And then into the appendix was again some headings and some themes around what policies were likely to go into the plan. Of course, things have moved on since that point. So what we wanted to do was almost take this as read, but then have Kirsty come in to then take you from this point onwards. And we've got a short presentation to take you through, and hopefully a bit of a timeline and put a bit more detail into this, if that's okay with you, Chair.
Yeah, lovely. Okay. Hand over to Kirsty then. Hi, Kirsty.
Hi, I'll just while my slides are loading, just introduce myself very quickly. So I'm Kirsty Paul and I'm the new local plans manager at the council. So I've been in post now since the start of January. Some of you may recognise me because I did work for Thurrock previously and was a principal planner in Sean's team about 3 years ago. And I left that post to go to the London Borough of Camden, where I'd been working in a comparable role to the one that I'm now employed by in Thurrock. So I took a sideward step to come back to an authority that always had a piece of my heart. So I'm quite excited to be back in the local plan team and driving forward this plan. So yeah, so as Lee mentioned, obviously the report at the start of January, I didn't really have the opportunity to feed into that because I'd only just started in post. Since then, we've been doing a lot of thinking internally around how best to engage with communities, how to manage all the different aspects of the local plan and the very complicated bits of evidence that are coming forwards. And that kind of sort of led us to rethink in terms of our consultation strategy and kind of those key stages in plan making going forwards. So if I just if you can have a look at the first diagram that I'm sharing here. So as you'll appreciate, we've been doing the local plan now for some time within Thurrock. Our most recent stage was some area-based design charrettes that we've been doing over 9 areas. And that process we've been underway with for the last 2 years. It's taken a lot longer than what we would have liked because of COVID, and we ended up having to do some events in a hybrid capacity, which wasn't ideal, and then going virtual only for, I think, 7 of them. But yeah, that's where we are in terms of what we've done to date. Going forwards, what we would like to do is to try and reinvigorate the conversation with communities in the summer through a series of in-person roadshow style events, similar to the Your Place, Your Voice roadshows that we did around the issues and options consultation. So the format would be very sort of driven towards trying to attract as many different types of people to do the consultation as possible, looking at how we can link in with other council services to create that more holistic conversation around places, and really kind of trying to figure out what those local priorities are and if anything has changed as a result of the pandemic, and sort of going forward, what is the expectations and aspirations of local communities in terms of the policies that are coming out of that plan. Following on from that, we would then have a formal consultation at the end of the year with the document hopefully going to full council in October. And this document would sort of cite out around the spatial strategy. So looking at sort of those character areas that are discussed within the report, what kind of proportion of growth are we expecting to see in each of those areas, and potentially setting out a target for each of those growth areas and specific settlements as well. And then a range of kind of strategic policies which address things like affordable housing, design, climate action, and just looking at how those policies balance. And what we would do as well as part of that document would include a list of sites at the back that would show how we would foresee those targets for each of the character areas being delivered. And then following on from that, in the next summer, what we would do is a much more detailed consultation document around those specific sites and more detailed policies that we would use kind of in a development management context. So it's all about kind of sort of like layering up that story, because from our perspective, we felt like we had to really kind of address those high level issues, make sure we got that right before we started doing that more in-depth work with communities, members and other stakeholders in terms of what these developments are actually going to look like on the ground, and what are those priorities and how can we reflect that within policy as well. And I think in terms of the allocations within the emerging plan, when we get to that sort of next summer consultation, at that point we'll be able to kind of like bottom out really what we feel are the key design and development principles for each of those locations, and to really figure out exactly what the key infrastructure asks are going to be. If there are any specific housing typologies that we would like to focus in particular locations, and what the expectations might be of sites with regards to that. And also thinking around kind of like the phasing of that development and the phasing of other developments. And I mean, the really exciting thing about a local plan is obviously that you're planning for things and you're able to look at that cumulative impact, which you're not able to do on a piecemeal site-by-site planning application. So we really can sort of consider a place in its whole and then make sure that all the development that's coming forward is done in a coordinated way that really kind of reflects what our overall needs are, but also those local needs and aspirations for communities. And then we get to our Regulation 19 consultation, which is our pre-submission draft. And this is the consultation which is very formal. So at this point, we start talking about matters of soundness and legal compliance in accordance with the National Planning Policy Framework. And that's the version then that gets submitted to the Planning Inspectorate and undertakes that examination in public. And then after that point, it's likely that we would need to have a main modifications consultation. Pretty much every plan that goes through PINS ends up with one of these consultations. And then the inspector's report is published and then the document can be adopted. In terms of that kind of emerging technical evidence, so what we're focusing on at the moment now is what we need to get that document to full council in October. So what do we need to know in terms of those strategic policies and that kind of spatial hierarchy, the spatial strategy for where growth is going to be directed across the borough. So these are a selection of studies, that there are still more than this that we're sort of working on. But essentially for kind of like housing and economy, it's things like our housing land availability study, it's the SHMA that you just had a presentation on, it's our economic development needs assessment work, it's an employment land availability assessment, and it's also work around kind of our centres and a retail strategy. And we are doing a little bit of work as well, scoping out the residential potential that exists within centres as part of our ambition to try and make sure that no stone is unturned when it comes to looking at the urban area and how that might sort of fulfil some of our needs with regards to residential but also employment uses. And then in terms of transport and infrastructure, our infrastructure baseline and delivery plan report is a real kind of focus for us and a real priority area, and I'll talk a little bit more around kind of the process and how that kind of works in an iterative way alongside plan making in a minute. And then we've got the Thurrock Transport Strategic Growth Options Assessment. We've got a vision for movement. And then there's the emerging Thurrock transport strategy that we'll reflect upon, as well as a strategic transport model that's coming forward. Because transport, as you'll appreciate, is one of our biggest barriers and challenges that we need to address going forward. And again, it's really, really important that we get that right through plan making. And we're considering that whenever we're looking at allocations or what kind of impact other policies might have in terms of how people and goods move across our borough. And then from an environment and placemaking perspective, we've done some work on landscape character assessment. We have a flood risk assessment that's underway, a green and blue infrastructure strategy, which will reflect things like the Sea Park proposal coming out of South Essex, but also looking at kind of like more local strategic places and how they play a role in things going forwards. So like Grays Beach, for example, and other assets that we might have that draw from a bit further afield. And then there's the stage 2 Greenbelt study, the climate change strategy, which obviously we touched upon earlier, and then the Thurrock energy strategy. So a whole host of different types of evidence that we need to kind of like balance and consider as we sort of pull together this range of policies that's going to form our development plan going forward for the borough over the next 15 years. I just wanted to quickly touch upon like the site assessment process. So that's obviously kind of like a key thing for us in terms of where sites are going to go. So we've done an exercise called a call for sites, which is where landowners, planning agents and other bodies can submit pieces of land that they would like us to assess for potential other uses. And I think there's over 300 sites in total that we're assessing across the borough that have potential, as well as other sites that we might have identified through other channels as well. So for example, if there's been kind of like a pre-application discussion on a site, or we're aware that there's a piece of land that maybe we feel is underutilized, they can be included as well. So in terms of the site assessment process, what we do is this kind of initial assessment. So we're looking at environmental and policy constraints, so impact it may have on landscape, townscape, any designated heritage assets. We also look at kind of the physical limitations of the site. So the existing infrastructure capacity, ground conditions, air quality impacts. And then we would look as to whether or not a site is available and if there's any market interest and if it's likely to come forward within the plan period for the use that's intended. Because we have got some examples of where sites have been submitted to us and we haven't got information on who the relevant landowner is. It's just a site that has been submitted on a very speculative basis. So that kind of initial assessment is just trying to give us a view as to which ones are likely to be the most kind of deliverable sites going forwards. At that point, if we haven't got enough green sites that meet our housing needs, we then need to start looking at how we can try and overcome constraints on other sites. So an example of that might be if we're looking at sites in the greenbelt, then we would be looking at our greenbelt assessment at the same time, and we would say, okay, are there any sites that are not performing in terms of our greenbelt land? So those are the tests that are set out within the National Planning Policy Framework. Our stage 1 assessment has told us already there's very few bits of land within Thurrock that isn't performing at least one of the functions that's set out within the NPPF. So if that's the case, then we need to say, okay, we're looking at this site now. Is there a way that the gains of developing this site can outweigh the harm to the loss of greenbelt? So it's one of the things that we consider, and one of the things that we would be looking at is how it goes above and beyond mitigating its own impact. So is it providing a piece of infrastructure that's needed within that community and not just responding to the change on that site? Is it looking at providing things like bungalows or a very sort of specialist housing typology that would help meet that local unmet need? And that's kind of all of the balance that we're having to do behind the scenes. And if it's things like if one of the constraints that's come up is around kind of like that infrastructure capacity point, then again, is there a piece of infrastructure that could be delivered alongside that site that would help address that particular issue? And that could again be to do with sort of highways and movements issues or particular transport blockers that we've got that might help release some sites that were previously considered to be constrained in some way, can then be sort of viewed as being a green site, a site that's more likely to come forwards. Another part of that assessment process is around our stakeholder engagement on potential sites and looking at kind of our preferred development approach. And that's why it's really important that when we go out at the end of the year, we are including a list of sites within that for communities to look at and to be able to comment on. And obviously, as we progress our evidence base, taking it through channels such as this and other member engagement channels is really, really important in terms of getting that feed in terms of the assessment and us being able to check and challenge the assessment findings and what we think we know about specific pieces of land, parcels of land. And then finally, kind of the last point is around kind of those viability assessments and seeing if a site does actually stack up on paper in terms of what our expected needs are from it. Because what we don't want is for us to say, yes, we want this site to come forward, and then all of a sudden they're telling us that they can't deliver what they said that they could deliver because of viability concerns. And also thinking around kind of those potential phasing strategies to make sure that there aren't kind of like any undue impacts on communities during that kind of intense construction periods, but also looking at whether or not we have enough housing land throughout our planned period, or if it's kind of all just grouped together in one particular location because of the lead-in times and kind of the build-out rates of different schemes. So finally, the last thing I wanted to kind of like touch upon was around that kind of infrastructure planning consultation process. I know it's something that's already been mentioned earlier tonight. As with most of our evidence base, because Thurrock is so it's so kind of like beautifully complicated in a planning sense. There's just so much happening in such a small geography. Everything we do has to kind of like be on this like iterative basis. So we're constantly like getting to a certain point, checking where we're at, going to another point, checking again, just to make sure that we get it right. And infrastructure is a key part of that. So if you look in terms of the steps that we've already done for infrastructure planning, so we produced a baseline a few years ago, and then we consulted on infrastructure points as part of our issues and options consultations. We've also touched upon kind of infrastructure needs as part of our area-based design charrette work. We're now at the point where we're going to do an update to that baseline again, and then start doing some sensitivity testing around growth scenarios. So it's looking at kind of like a range of how many homes could be built in an area. So picking like a middle point and then saying, what if we built 20% less than that? What if we built 20% more than that? What would the impact be? To try and get a feel for what emerging infrastructure needs might be, and also to better understand kind of the existing capacity within there. And when I say infrastructure, it's a whole host of different types of infrastructure. It's looking at social infrastructure in terms of health centres, schools, community facilities, the movement stuff from a transportation perspective, utilities, waste, and also thinking around kind of like those green and open spaces and your blue infrastructure as well. So throughout the process, there's kind of always that opportunity for infrastructure providers and also for members of the community to be able to have a dialogue, a conversation with us about this particular piece of work, so we can refine it as we go through, and make sure that by the time we get to examination and the plan is adopted, that we have a really, really kind of like clear strategy of what infrastructure needs to come into play when, and also more importantly, that it is deliverable. And it can be funded either through a Section 106 or through an on-site contribution or as part of a SIL contribution. So it's really, really important for us that we kind of take that approach. And there's other bits of evidence that we're doing that kind of like iterative approach with as well. And that was kind of like all the extra bits that I wanted to show to you that kind of we've moved on a little bit since that report in January. And I'll take questions now.
Thanks, Kirsty. Feels a bit like deja vu to me. Because we've been here before, and you know, we don't get it right this time. God help us. I think with the River Thames, we've never used it to its full potential. You know, if you're at Tilbury Riverside and you look across at Gravesend and you see what they've done with the river, you see the potential they've achieved. We haven't. You know, we haven't done anything. If people coming off those cruise ships think that that is Tilbury, I don't know, because it's in a terrible, terrible state. And I know the cruise terminal was being done up with lottery money, so I know that's on the cards, but we've also got a lot of work to do down there. We've got to redo the where the ferry lands, you know, we've got to do that. Gravesend have already done that. You know, we're so far behind. We seem to, I don't know, we just don't take care of the river. We've got so much potential down there and we don't use it. You know, we don't, it's somewhere good for people to look out onto the water, you know, and live somewhere where they can actually stare at water. It's quite good. It's quite, you know, restful. So I think we've lost something there. I hope we're going to put that in. When site specifics comes up, I hope that 49 members will have an input into that.
Me too.
I hope so. I mean, we've got places in Thurrock where we did have 2 Thurrock nurseries where we used to grow all our own plants, and they are sitting there now with nothing on it. So that is 2 sites that we are not cultivating. The trouble is, it's knowing Thurrock. You know, you've got to get out. I know you know Thurrock a little bit, Kirsty, because you've been here before. I always moan at people, even officers who don't get out into Thurrock and have a look at it. You know, because it's a big, like you said just now, we're building houses in West Thurrock, which is an industrial area. Why would you want to put houses in an industrial area to give people pollution, which they are taking in, day out? You know, we are building in Lakeside, where the pollution is great, you know, and it's gridlocked. How do those houses get out of the area when they have to? That I don't understand. You know, I mean, I suppose there are people that want to live right in the middle of something because it's near the station or whatever, but I can't see them sitting out in their garden with all the pollution that's around them, you know, industrial and cars. So I think we've got to start looking at other areas and building better for people, you know.
I think it's a really, really fair point. I mean, I did an internal show and tell with colleagues the other week, and for me, a local plan is all about creating successful places. And I think, you know, we get so het up about these numbers that we forget actually everything that sits around them. And there has been that kind of we need a plan for so many other reasons than just the fact that we're not building enough homes. In Thurrock, like you say, there's a whole sort of like culture shift and change, and there's more that needs to be done in terms of creating that sense of arrival in Thurrock, really appreciating our location on the Thames, and you know, trying to sort of work out how to kind of knit communities together a bit more. Because I remember from when I was working in Thurrock previously, there were issues around kind of like community cohesion, and it's trying to find, like you said, those places where people can bump into one another, and create those kind of hearts of communities that sort of feel like they've been lost in some places, not everywhere, but in some places you kind of do get that feeling like, you know, you could walk past anyone, and then there are other parts in the borough where you feel like everybody knows each other's business, and it's, you know, it's that real kind of like sense of community kind of like driving it. And we want everyone to feel like that, I think.
Further out, Kirsty, when you leave West Thurrock, you know, you go through that industrial part and then you come into Grays and then you go out into the rural parts of Thurrock, which is very pretty, you know, and as you said, they've got community based. My ward is a community based ward, but it's you only get that through time. But I think where you've built on London Road, I don't think there's any community there at all. I think people go, it's a bit like, I hate to say Chafford, but when it was built, it wasn't built as a community. It gradually got, when it first started, it was building good quality houses, but as it got into the centre of Chafford, it built denser and the roads were smaller and the community went. And I think what you've got with Chafford at the moment, it's an in and out community. You know, people go out to work and they come home and that's it. You know, you have to have that, as you have to have that backbone of somewhere. If you're building somewhere, you have that backbone there. If you haven't got it, then you won't get the community to put into it, because you need those, whether you're going to build houses wherever, you need to have the community there to build that up. You know, if it's to live in and go to work and come home, it isn't a community. You know,
Definitely. And I think the other thing is as well, when you look at kind of the relatively compact nature of Thurrock, like I said, there is a lot of things trying to happen in one relatively small geography. We really need to look at how we can make whatever we put in work really, really hard. And that might be around kind of multifunctional spaces. It might be around kind of looking at meanwhile or temporary uses while bigger sites are being developed. So, you know, if you can't build a permanent community space, can you put something temporary in until the phase where the actual community centre comes in? So people moving in and people in that existing community can start to meet and engage and you know, start talking around things. You know, like you said, the allotments are a great sort of coming together as well. And there's a couple of kind of schemes that I can think of nationally that have done like community orchards and informal food growing, and they've been great kind of like conversation starters for older people and for younger people. I mean, my mother-in-law is fantastic with my son and pointing out different types of plants as they walk around, and he's starting to develop an interest in kind of different types of trees and plants and how things look. So it's nice to kind of have those opportunities that bring different sections of a community together. Yeah.
We just spoke about allotments. Back, you was probably listening, but
I was.
yeah, I mean that was only an odd bit of land that I did, you know, and it wasn't even used. You know, I expected a couple of dead bodies to come out of it, but it was a piece of land with all soil and everything else, and all they found was old motorbikes and who knows what. But it had been sitting there for years, not being used. But I only could use it because it was housing land. And once we dug it over and we opened it up and we got sort of 60, it's surprising how quick they went, because people want that piece of land just to go to, you know, to be able to put a little shed up and sit there and grow and talk, as you said, communities to sit and talk to each other, you know, and it's right near the rugby club. They could probably sell the rugby club some of their fruit and veg, and, you know, it all comes together, doesn't it? It works together.
Yeah.
Sandy?
Yeah, you pointed out earlier about Grays Beach. I mean, we have so many plans in the borough, we're going to do this and do that. Is there a date set for it to be complete? Grays Beach?
I'm not sure about actual specific proposals for developments. I mean, that wouldn't be my area. I'm not sure, Lee, have you got any information on that at all?
No, I haven't. No, apologies, I haven't. We can certainly speak to the relevant teams and come back to you, Chair, if that would help. But no, not off the top of my head.
I mean, that's another bit of land we've never really done anything with either, have we? You know, it's that Grays Yacht Club and Grays Beach, which used to be in years gone by, used to be quite dynamic. It has a swimming pool and everything that went along with that. And it's just lost its, I think, dare I say it, you know, I've probably gone off at this, but I think that you lose the heart in a place. You know, if there's no heart in it, and I would think a lot of people don't know how close they live to that river at all. They probably don't even know it's there, you know, which is such a shame because that could be enhanced. And I go back 20, 30 years and it hasn't altered at all. It's still the same. If we move with this plan, if we move forward, I hope a lot of these things come to fruition, because if they don't, this is just a talking shop. You know, I sat on this 10 years ago and I'm still sitting on it, and I want to see some meat on the bones, you know, something to produce something. Because if we don't, we're just back where we were before, you know, and I really want to see something happen. As Councillor Tandy said, you know, we've been talking about it for so long and nothing seems to move. You were quite young when you started, Lee, you know. I think we've got to have some way forward, you know, otherwise we're going to see, I don't know, is the yacht club in with talks with everybody? It doesn't seem to me like anybody knows what's happening down there on the river. You know, if we're talking about a stop for the river taxis to stop at, that's a big job, Lee.
It is, Chair, and I think what Kirsty was talking about is absolutely right in the sense of the how we're approaching the entire borough and how we're zoning in on towns and villages. And of course, when we're looking at areas like Grays, there has to be that sort of in-depth look at how the components of Grays work for businesses, for residents, for users of the river, and how we can draw, as you quite rightly say, how we draw people back to the river and what developments we need to make sure that actually happens, how we facilitate that. So within the plan, there will be those sort of I say like best description of sort of mini master plans and plans that pop out of the local plan that then look at more detail about how, for instance, Grays and the components all work together, and obviously the yacht club will be part of one of those. But all the points that you've raised, members, this evening, you know, really valuable as always, but things that we are working our way through right now. What I would say, Chair, is that obviously we did have the core strategy that's been really successful in bringing about a lot of business and development to the borough. New local plan, we talk a lot about homes. It will be unashamedly housing focused, but there will still be the element of still 22,500 new jobs expected through the plan period. So there still will be a focus on jobs and employment as well. So we're expecting this plan to be perhaps more balanced than the core strategy was. So we are, you know, we've got high expectations, high ambitions for the plan. There's no pressure, Kirsty.
Well, you've got the free port, you've got a lot of jobs going down there, haven't you?
Absolutely.
So we've got a lot of jobs coming all over Thurrock, really. You know, I probably know things that come in even you don't. But we've got an awful lot of things. We try not to say too much, you know. I think we've got a lot of things happening in Thurrock, but we have to, as Kirsty just said, we don't have to focus all on housing. You know, there has to be an element of, because not much has gone into sport and the provision of sport and the provision of getting it for the kids. And so we have to take that. We need an update in this. I know the sporting strategy's got to go through yet, but that needs to be done because kids need that now. They don't need it 10 years time, they need it now. And if we don't get to that, then our kids will suffer because they need somewhere to have a decent sporting venue to play. You know, we need the decent swimming pool. They need somewhere where they can go. You know, so we need all that, and parks, and we need everything. But I think we need to move. You know, we should get together, Kirsty. we need an awful lot of stuff. I think we must. I won't go on because we've got to be out of here by 9:30. That's it, Collins.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, I'm just touching sort of what you said earlier, Lee, about 22,000 new jobs. That's Freeport's, but are we looking at industry as well back in the borough? Because the way to build a community is to have a lot of people work in the same place, especially, you know, for those communities provide the labour of those industries. Have we got any plans for that?
Thank you, Chair. So absolutely. As I say, it needs to be a balanced plan. There's not a lot of point in just having a plan which focuses just on jobs or just on housing. They need to work together. And Chair just mentioned about Freeport's. So Thames Freeport obviously bringing about a significant number of jobs and large areas of land for employment generating purposes. And really, I think one of the things that I'm interested in as well is about how the innovation side of things can come into this, how we can have research and development and all the things we spoke about earlier. So we've got our stable, as to be expected industries, but then also how do we upskill our kids coming through school and give them opportunities for a wide range of careers and in the borough, so they can hopefully be able to live in the borough, work in the borough, and build that community as you're talking about. Going back to the very first presentation of the evening, how do we then connect people to the jobs and to the homes via more sustainable ways of transport? So it is all built. It's all connected, obviously, and it's a bit of a puzzle that we need to put together. But yeah, absolutely. The jobs and industry will certainly form part of any Thurrock plan, I think, for many years to come.
Another question.
Councillor Collins.
Can I just look at the local development plan task force local plan update? Paragraph 1.2, the NPPF requires that plan should, and it says A, be prepared with the objective of contributing to the achievement of sustainable development. What do they actually mean by sustainable?
So the definition of sustainable covers economic sustainability, environmental sustainability, and looking at kind of the social side as well. So essentially, it's about kind of like balancing those three priorities. So if you read the NPPF as a whole and follow all the different kind of looking at the core things within that in itself contributes towards that creation of kind of what sustainable development is. So it doesn't mean just in sort of an environmental perspective, it means balancing those three strands.
And have we got that in this plan, or will we have that in this plan?
Yes, we will. So it's one of the key pieces of evidence that wasn't actually cited on my list that we do is something called a sustainability appraisal. So every policy within the plan, every site allocation has to go through this process called sustainability appraisal, where we have a series of objectives that to us tally up to what we think is a successful, a sustainable outcome. So each policy then is assessed against those particular objectives, and we would rate the impact level of it. And if through that assessment process it identifies policies which are maybe not performing as strongly as they should, it can make recommendations to us then in terms of the policy wording to reinforce specific things, or to potentially look at a different option going forward to make sure that the plan as a whole is contributing towards that creation of sustainable development and the achievement of successful places.
Okay, thank you, Chair.
Lee, or Kirsty, what are we actually, because we've got rid of so many pubs I know Tilbury's devout of pubs now. I've never had one in my ward anyway, but we seem to be devout of that, putting in perhaps restaurant come pub. We're not including that in anything we do. I've not seen anything in any big development that's come through. like that. We always think of schools and doctors and everything else, but people do need that release out sometimes, you know. So, and we've not done anything like that at all. We seem to, our pubs and places seem to go. I haven't even got, in my ward, I haven't even got a community centre. I haven't got anything. So it's that sort of, the community has to rely on people that set up community things to do, you know, to raise money, or which we do. But I think we've got to start, I don't know how you add that in, Lee, but I just think that we need something like that.
So
You
we
know.
actually quite recently, as part of the design charrette process, started looking at a critical mass to be able to sustain particular types of facilities. So in terms of like how much population would you need for a Marston's or for some sort of, you know, pub chain to come in? And I think it was something like 5,000 population increase, which would be about 2,500 new homes, maybe, to sort of be able to kind of like equate a need for that. And then you've got to find a supplier to come in. What has been more successful in other places is kind of like those community run pubs, where what you would do is you would get a space and then kind of like you get a community trust or somebody that comes in and takes it over. And we can also look through planning in terms of how we can maybe safeguard some of those kind of existing facilities within communities, and if there's anything we can do in terms of our planning powers to make it more difficult for those assets to turn to other uses potentially. But I think it's a really, really good point, definitely.
And isn't it, Kirsty, to make that changeover, whatever, you know, you change from category 1 or category 2 or a food. I mean, look at Allsett, it's got 3 pubs and a shop and a great community, you know, and that's only stemmed over time. You know, they've still got their 3 pubs that work, and they still keep going.
I think in terms of use classes as well. Now, forgive me if I'm wrong in this, Lee, because obviously the use class order changed last year, and we now have a Class E use class, which makes town centre uses, employment, some community uses, and things like doctor surgeries and nurseries now all fall within the same use class, where they used to fall within different ones before, which means that there's much more flexibility in terms of what buildings can potentially be used for. And I think public houses sit outside of Class E. I think they're a separate use class, so they don't have that flexibility to be able to change to other uses without planning permission, like a normal retail unit would. I'll have to double check that, but I'm pretty confident that public houses fall outside of Class E, and then maybe sort of a D use now going forwards.
Horndon on, you know, Horndon or some place, Malvern and places like that, you know, haven't got anything, perhaps a coffee shop, or because you've got a lot of young mums using the schools and things like that. There's nowhere to congregate together. Once they come out of school, it's either use someone's home. So I think sometimes that sort of thing is needed within that development, which they've lost their little shop in Malvern now. So you know, they've got I think they've got a community shop now, haven't they, though? Probably don't know it, but they've got a little community shop, which is good, run by the community. So, but no, I think there's a lot of things we can change to bring communities together. I think we've got to, otherwise, you just hope that once we get the site specific in and we get this development plan working, and we put together a proper plan and we get it through as quick as we can.
I mean, essentially with a local plan, what we do, because we don't actually, you know, we don't deliver or build anything ourselves. What we're doing is we're creating the conditions for things to come forward. And certainly what we do need to be thinking about is how we create places that are more than just houses. We're creating, like you said, communities. And it's thinking about those other things that come in and making sure that the policies kind of respond to what that wider want and wider ask is. But obviously, whatever we do has to be set in that element of realism. Because actually, if it's not deliverable, if it's not viable, nobody's going to build it, and we end up in the same situation that we're in now, where we're falling short in terms of housing numbers and run the risk of having to approve development that maybe we're not quite happy with, because we haven't got that same sort of level of control over what's coming forward. but definitely as we have those summer roadshow events, I'm really excited about getting out, talking with communities again, and just kind of like reaffirming what we know about communities, then using that to help influence that draft plan that will be going to full council, like I said, hopefully in October.
We know what most people are going to say to you, Kirsty. You've got too
I
many
do.
That's what we on the doorstep hear all the time. You've got too many houses and it's getting too built up. And that's what people don't want. You know, they look at places like London Road and think, how many actual more houses can we get in London Road? You know, I don't think there's many more we can fill that up with.
Yeah.
Now to its peak, I think.
Yeah, and I think we're certainly going to be doing our most to try and broaden participation, because we are kind of we are very sort of aware of the fact that the people who respond to our consultation tend to be the usual suspects, and it would be really helpful for us to try and talk more with younger people, with people who are, you know, a bit more sort of time poor, they've got family. I mean, to be quite honest, you know, I've got 2 children under 5. I very rarely get engaged with local consultations that are happening in my area, and it's just how we kind of reach out to those people and really try and make sure that the responses we're receiving are reflective of the communities, and we're tapping into kind of those other areas, which is why, you know, I think the summer events will be a really good way to do that, when it's outdoor and it's open, so there's less fear of kind of the virus, but it also gives us a chance to do things a little bit more informally, play around with some more creative consultation methods to try and draw people in who wouldn't traditionally engage with a planning consultation.
I think you're right when you say, because once you've got young children, you tend to live and children, don't you? You seem to. I mean, years ago people did get involved with PTAs and the schools. They did get involved with the schools. I know I was always involved with the schools, but I think that's sort of waned off now. People don't really want to belong to PTAs or on the board of governors or anything. So I think we've either got to try and bring that back slightly, because your age group is good for schools, because you put in some good input into the schools, because you've got a younger viewpoint. You know, you need that. You know, I've gone through life raising money all my life, so I think because you're used to that, you tend to do it all the time. So I think we need youngsters' input, but you also need that variety.
Definitely, yes, totally.
Stages of your life, don't you? When the children are young, when the children are in the middle, then we can't move because the children are going to, you know, the bigger school. So we've got to stay where we are. And so there's lots of times in your life when you have to just get on with living. You know, you haven't got time to do it. I do sincerely agree with you. We have to build those communities back. It's not all about building houses and how many can we get on a footprint. We have to put that energy back in to communities, you know, for them to take hold of it. I think so. Yes. Okay. You all right, Kirsty? Have we bored you enough?
No, it's fine. I can hear my my youngest has been crying in the background. Unfortunately, my mother-in-law's over because my husband's on church duty tonight, so she's helping out with him. So hopefully you haven't heard too much screaming. I've got my headset on, so it should have been quite protected.
Anything? No, and that's all right anyway. But thank you, Kirsty. It's nice to have you back in Thurrock.
Thank you.
Like
Nice to be back.
Sounds like you've got a bit of vision and a little bit of interest in Thurrock.
Yeah, just want to add to that. Obviously, she is saying about communities and halls and everything as well. Sport facilities is great, even having them 3G pitches around scale. I think the council only owned one. Being involved with football.
Don't own it.
Don't know that.
No.
Nothing.
But Lee, just to go back on that, what Councillor Tandy said, the pitch opposite Sainsbury's. Yeah, the 3G pitch that we built. I did the funding for that. But I just found out the other day that Thurrock can't use it.
What, the next to Coach Park? Is that the one we're talking about? The council, it's council owned, isn't it? The land.
No, it's not. No, we don't own it. No, I think the clubhouse was owned by the police years ago. It was a police clubhouse years ago. I thought we didn't own it, but it seems to I've been told by sporting people that they can't play them anymore. So if you can just find out a little bit for me.
Yeah, of course. My understanding was that we owned the site and it was leased, but can certainly come back to you, Chair, on that.
Yeah, it's obviously leased out to someone else now, and we can't.
No problem. I'll get someone from our leisure team to make contact with you. It's fine.
Anything else to say? Sure. Do you want Kirsty to come back on what you said? That's all.
Yeah.
Yeah, Kirsty, you come back on what Councillor Tandy said about the sporting.
Yeah, so in terms of sporting provision, again, when I was talking around that kind of infrastructure discussion that we're having, sports and leisure facilities is a part of that as well. I think the biggest difficulty you've got in terms of delivering some of those higher spec bits of kit is the cost. And figuring out whether or not actually that can be financed. And we have been doing some work previously with Sport England on our active place strategy and working with them to identify specific projects for sport and leisure and built facilities. And they obviously have access then to different funding pots that we could utilise to supplement alongside any developer contributions. So I think we're about to reignite that piece of work in the coming months. So that then will kind of be our opportunity to sort of say, okay, well, what are we thinking in terms of built facilities, but also looking at our playing pitch provision as well across the authority.
Just want to add to that as well, obviously being involved in and not now, the youth, we've got the biggest youth in the borough, but they've got no home, Grays Athletic Football Club. Is there anything there for them or anything they can get in the pipeline to get a home, a base?
So I actually remember from first time round having conversations with Grays Athletic Football Club, and we've always been sort of quite clear to them if they've got any particular pieces of land that they're interested in, we're happy to look at that through our site allocations process and consider it as part of the local plan. We'd also invited them previously to let us know what their particular land specifications were, so that if there was an opportunity for a site that came forward that could potentially accommodate a venue on them, we could then make them aware and try and sort of put them in touch with one another. So yes, it is something that we're aware of, and it's something that we're happy to consider through the process. But it very much has to be them kind of working with us on that.
Kirsty, I've asked Grays Athletic to come here. I think they were supposed to come to one committee. They were supposed to come here and talk to us. So I have invited them again.
Right.
So I think it's something. I think what they need is what we haven't got. Basically.
Potentially.
Potentially, yeah. I think they wanted Blackshots Field, but there's no inner and outer. That's the trouble with Blackshots. And they've got to have a space where they can, like Western Homes on the A12, Lee. Western Homes built that site, and that was built with Western Homes in conjunction with them, and that's got where you can go off the A12 and then back on the A12. So it's a better site, and I think that's what Grays Athletic should have. Is bigger, but the trouble is they want to stay in Grays, and there isn't that land facility at the moment in Grays. So I think we need to talk. We need to talk to them anyway, or to give them a chance to come here and voice their opinion. I think they was due to come to one of these meetings, but it never happened. So we can put that down. Thank you, dear. So we need to have them back here so they can talk to us. So I think they think we don't want to talk, but we do. You know, and I think the Royal Hotel they was looking at as well, that site, but I don't know whether that's up for housing or.
Yeah, I think sort of the competition for land issues are extremely high within the borough, and it's not just for residential uses. Obviously, there's a lot of parcels of land that are coming forward for employment, and you'll be aware that some of the pieces of land within the borough are actually more profitable employment use than they are in residential. So it is quite tough to find available bits of land, and certainly like I said, if they have got a land specification that they're working to and that's been updated at all in terms of what sort of the site needs, site size, any kind of key access considerations, it's something we can look at to see if there are any pieces of land that might match that profile. And we're also happy to look at any parcels that they've already been speaking to people about. And I think the other point to mention is through a local plan. Obviously, if we were to look to allocate a site for that particular use, what we would want is some form of commitment to community that comes out of that, because it would be very difficult, I think, for us to justify allocating a particular site for private enterprise. So we'd also want to be looking at what the wider community benefit of that development was going to be, and just sort of.
Firstly, how could they commit to community? Because all they're doing is getting kids to play football. I don't know what you would give back to the community, because those kids are coming from the community. So I don't know what else you would give back to community, which they're already doing. It's a bit like cricket. We've got people out there who we give money to, who coach the kids for cricket, and they've got over 200 colts. So they are taking one hell of a lot of kids off the streets and want to play sport. But I don't know what you mean, and I'm not getting at you, Kirsty. I just want to know
Fine.
what you would think of something to give back to community.
So
But
it's like you said, it's commitments through the academies, for example. So exactly how many children are they able to facilitate? How much of their space are they able to use for other community functions? It's just looking at that wider package, essentially. Because if they do end up, we end up looking at a piece of land that is in the green belt, say, for example, because as we know, we're very kind of land poor within the urban area, then we have to be able to justify that benefit outweighs of greenbelt. So anything we can demonstrate in terms of a wider package, or anything that site is doing, we need to be able to justify and evidence through the planning inspector process, the examination in public process.
I just could give back, but you're saying if they've got something they can hire out every.
But it might just be reiterating what they're already doing, councillor. It's not necessarily a case of something more. It's just about making sure that the evidence and the argument is in place.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, no, thanks, Kirsty. I mean, I think if we have them here, they can give us a little bit of insight into what they want. You know, I know they were coming at one point, but it got stopped for some reason. So I think COVID did a lot of it, so we didn't get to speak to them, but hopefully. Yeah, thanks, Kirsty, very much for your input. Much appreciated. Very much. Nice to have you back and know you know a bit about Thurrock. Thank you, Lee. Did you want to add anything, Lee? You're muted.
Sorry, Chair, I was just trying to get unmute. No, nothing to add. Thank you.
Okay, lovely. Thank you both very much, and hopefully we'll see you in the municipal year. So, you know, we'll get the plan done hopefully by then.
Thank you very much, councillors.
Thank you.
Yes, Chair. Thanks, members.
Bye.
Bye bye. Thank you.
Just signing up really the work programme.
I was going to say,
Chair, and we'll start a new one for next.
Yeah, we will. Yeah.
Lovely.
Yeah, everybody quite happy with that?
Yeah.
No, I wanted to cover that, sorry, about those athletics, because they weren't supposed to come here. I know where they're paying at the moment, they're paying 20 grand a year. Close the meeting, yes?
Yeah.
Thank you very much.
Same time?
Yes.
Yeah.
I haven't got clock.
Oh.
21:17. Thank you. Okay.
Yeah, super.